Okay, I'm going to run through one more example of analyzing the effect of an excise tax, and I'm going to do it really quickly so we can cover a lot of ground since we've done it once before. So here are our demand and supply equations. I've graphed them, 12 minus 1 half Q, and P equals Q simply for the supply curve here. And suppose the government puts a $6 tax per hamburger on this product. Now, by now, you can figure out that the equilibrium price is $8 and the equilibrium quantity is 8 units on this graph, and you can figure out that the consumer surplus is up here and that the producer surplus is down here, and the total revenue and variable costs, right? You know how to do all that. And so I just want to show you a quick way to analyze a tax and then show you more about tax incidence. And so if there's a $6 tax, as we talked about in the previous lecture, you can either, don't do both, but you can either analyze it by moving the demand curve up by $6, the marginal cost up by $6, or by taking the demand curve and shifting the marginal benefit down by $6, that willingness to pay down by $6. Let's just do that real quickly so we can visualize exactly where that would be. Let's see if I can grab the right curve here. So the y-intercept's 12. We're just going to move the y-intercept down to 6. And when you do that, you're going to see that the new quote-unquote equilibrium, we don't really call it an equilibrium, I guess, but the new price paid by consumers will be $4, but then they're going to pay another $6 on top of that to the government. And so the important part of shifting either the supply curve up 6 or the demand curve down 6 is to see that that quantity is going to be 4 and that one price is going to be $4. That's the price the business actually gets to keep, and then the other price the consumer pays will be $6 higher, 10. So what a tax does is it makes a gap. It forces a wedge of $6 between the demand and the supply curve. Now, we can actually do this without shifting a curve. This is a way that people do it once they've done this a bunch of times before, is just to draw a line, go over here to our y-axis and draw a line that is $6 high. So I'm going from 6 down to 0 just to see what a line that is $6 looks like. How tall is $6? Well, that's it. Now let me pick up that line. And what we want to do is jam this $6 in between the demand and supply curve and see where it fits. Just keep going until it just barely snugs in there in between the demand and the supply curve. And that is the place where you know that tax is going to be, at a quantity of 4. And once you have that, you can just draw a couple of more lines and you're done. Well, you know that that's the price the consumers are actually going to pay up there, and then down here that's the price, $6 less, that the producers are going to receive down there. And then you know that the variable costs is going to be, down here below the supply curve over to 4 units. And voila, you're pretty much done. You got the variable costs, you have your producer surplus. Let me just type those in here real quick. Producer surplus. We got the tax revenue like we saw last time right here, and then we got the consumer surplus up there, all pretty easy to calculate in the variable costs. But then something we need to spend a little bit more time on is this tax incidence. And so let's go through that again. If we look at the old equilibrium price, which was $8, and let me give that a nice bright color here. Okay, the old equilibrium price was $8. What happened to the consumer price that they have to pay? Well, they now pay 10. So how much is the incidence? How much are they affected by this tax? Well, they're impacted by $2 on the price they pay. So if somebody asks you, how much of the tax does the consumer pay? You say, well, $2 of the tax. Because I used to pay 8, now I pay 10. I'm paying $2 more. So the incidence for the customer would be $2, the consumer. Now the producer has to be paying the other $4 of the tax, and let me just show you where that is here. It's going to be they used to be receiving $8 for their product, and now they are only receiving uh, $4 for their product. So they are receiving $4 less than they used to. So they're paying $4 of the tax. Let me make that a bright red. And the consumers are paying $2 of the $6 tax. The amount of the tax has to be split between the two, but not evenly, because here the business is paying more than the consumer is. Now again, why? I mentioned last time this basic rule that there are a few ways to phrase it, but whoever is more elastic pays less of the tax, right? You could also say whoever is more inelastic pays more of the tax, but whoever is more elastic, elastic means stretchy, you're responsive, you're flexible. And so if you're elastic, you don't have to pay that tax. You can get out of paying some of that tax. But whoever is more elastic is going to pay less. Now, how can we tell who's more elastic? Remember that equation in the elasticity section. 1 over the slope times P over Q tells you the elasticity. Translating that into simple English for this case, whoever has the flatter slope is more elastic. Whoever is steeper is more inelastic, because the quantity doesn't respond. If your, say, demand curve was perfectly inelastic, it would be straight up and down, meaning that as the price goes up, you're still going to buy 8. You're always going to buy 8 no matter what the price is. But in this case, the demand curve has a slope of a half, minus a half. They're flatter than the slope of 1 for the supply curve. So they're more elastic. They're going to pay less of the tax. Now, how does this change? Let me just show you dynamically what will happen. Let me clean up a couple of these things here so that we can just focus on what's going to happen to who pays how much of the tax. I'm going to take this demand curve and I'm going to move it. I'm going to make it much, much more steep. So let's make it much steeper here, and let's see what happens to the amount of the tax. Let me make the I'll make the equilibrium price the same, 8. But now this demand curve has a much steeper slope. It looks like it's somewhere around -2, but not quite. And so the -2 approximately slope is steeper than the slope of the supply curve, which is +1. Now let me pick up that tax, which is $6, that little green $6 there, and let me jam it into this little wedge here. And this is not going to be a nice round number since I just picked up the demand curve and moved it around. But it looks like this equilibrium quantity, the way we've done it, is going to be somewhere between 5 and 6. And the equilibrium price is going to be somewhere around 12. We could figure out the equations and we could actually solve for this, but that's not the point of this lecture. It's for you to visualize what's happening. So let's say that the equilibrium price here is about 12 for the consumer. Let me move that up there. And that the equilibrium price for the producer is going to be around 6, let's say. We're fudging things just a little bit, but that's all okay. And so we jammed that $6 gap between the demand and the supply curve in there to see that the quantity is about 5.5, but that's not really what's important. What's important is who pays how much of the tax in this case. Well, the consumers used to pay 8 and the producers used to pay 8 before this tax. But now that the demand curve is much steeper, you can see that their price went up about $4 and the producer's price went down by the other 2. And so here the tax incidence, the consumers are paying more of the tax than the suppliers are, because the demanders are more inelastic now than the suppliers. Now, elasticity and slope is not the same thing, but they are related by that formula, 1 over the slope times P over Q. So as your slope gets steeper, your elasticity goes down, and you become more inelastic, and you're going to pay more of the tax. Now, if we suppose the supplier said, wow, we want to become more elastic now so we don't have to pay as much of this tax, let's make their slope much flatter. Now let's jam that $6 in here. Okay, right about there. And now let's see. Um, well, that's not the same equilibrium price. Sorry, let me make this a little more simple, and let me make the equilibrium price still 8 there so we can see what's going on. If we jam that $8 in there, right about there, we can see that now the price for the consumer goes up by about almost the whole tax, and the producer's not really paying much of the tax at all, right? Because now the producer is much more flexible, much more elastic, and so that tax is not going to affect them much at all, and the consumers are going to be paying just about all the tax. So you can just play around with drawing different slopes, and you can see how this is going to work out.